We've learned an awful lot about tables in the brief history of the web. One thing is that using them for layout is definitely problematic, although, of course, as we've mentioned, it was what we had. So now that we're shifting away from that, it becomes very interesting to see how we create tables that are both structural, semantic, as well as being accessible to people who need a little more information about how the table is structured because perhaps they cannot see it. So if you go into Chapter 12, you can find all of the files that we need. And if you're using snippets in Dreamweaver, we've also included the snippets so that you can follow along as we build the structured table. The first thing I'm going to do is put the table element in. Go ahead and drag that over. And give us a little breathing room here. And as you can see here, I've got the table opening tag. And here I've added a summary of the table. This is a very helpful attribute used for clarifying what the table is about, essentially summarizing the table, in this case, Worrier Specialties. The next thing we're going to add is a caption. Drop that in there. And just as we caption titles for screen, a table caption is a further method of giving information to the person looking at the site as to what the table is all about. And you can use this area to essentially title your tables, and then you can style this particular element.
It's a little bit like using a header above a table, as you might do to sort of introduce what the table contents are. But in this case, using the caption element is much more semantic as it links the caption with the table. It's also important to note that the summary attribute that we added isn't visually displayed in the browser, but the caption element is displayed.
Exactly. And then, of course, as I mentioned, because that it is displayed, you can style it and visually represent that as well as move it around or do whatever you want. So it adds another piece of information that can be styled. After the caption, we're going to go ahead and add the table head, T-head, and drop that in there. And for those of you who've been working with tables, you may have seen a number of table elements used over the years, but these are elements that were introduced in HTML4, and they are specific to grouping like items within a table to create a better cognizant method of explaining information to people. So if I were blind and I couldn't see this table, I would need more information about what the table was structured like so that the data in the table made sense to me logically. So here in the table head, I've been able to introduce a row. That's probably an element you're familiar with, the TR. And then I've added table headers here using the TH element. This is very important because in the past, what we used to do in presentational HTML for table headers is we would put TDs and then we'd like bold. We've always had this particular element, but it was not well used in the early days. So now we know we need to go back, and when we're creating the heads for our table, the various categories for a table, we want to go ahead and clarify that it is in fact a table head. And we're giving it a scope. In other words, we're providing where this table head is located within the table, further clarifying what the role of this particular table head means in the context of the whole table.
Essentially, it's the direction.
Exactly. This is showing that it's a column. So we've got 3 table heads creating our table columns. So below that, I'm going to go ahead and put the T foot. Let's drop that in there. And this, like the table head, is the table foot, and this is where we're going to put the footer information. Once again, we have a row, table row, with some table data cells here. So we have 2 cells, 1 spanning 2 columns, and this is the foot portion of the table. You might wonder why I went from head to foot without putting the body in between. It's a curiosity, but this is how it's done when we're writing semantic XHTML markup that is accessible. So we put the head and the foot first in that order, and then we go ahead and add the table body. And here you can see I've dropped in the table body code, which is surrounded by the T-body element. And I've got 3 rows, which each contain table cells. these should be elements you're probably familiar with, having worked with HTML, and especially if you've been developing sites using tables for layout. The table row and table cell are the fundamental building blocks of table-based layouts. So these are all probably very familiar elements to you. But as you can see, we've grouped them logically, given caption, given summary, to extend the meaning of the data within the table. Let's go ahead and save this file and take a look at what it looks like in Firefox without any styling. I take that back. There's a little bit of style here from the global style sheet, but Andy is going to go ahead and make this table look very attractive as we build style. But here you can see this is the caption, and here are our table heads, and here's our rows and cells.